Welcome to WHRO's Weekly Edition. I'm Doug Boynton. In this week's program, Gillian Pressman of YIMBY Hampton Roads speaks with WHRO's Ryan Murphy to discuss how that group is pushing the region's cities to produce more affordable housing.
We need to actively counter that. So we're YIMBY, which stands for Yes in My Backyard, and we're people who are so enchanted by all the tremendous benefits of building new housing.
And VCIJ's Lou Hansen sits down with reporter Carolyn Shapiro to discuss their latest investigative story into the low wages and poor working conditions workers endure at Dollar Tree stores in Virginia. But first, this news update from NPR. Families of Gold Star and disabled veterans are demanding that the General Assembly fix the scholarship program that provided tuition relief for spouses and dependents. The Virginia Senate's reaction? Yeah, we'll create a committee for that. WHRO's Steve Walsh covers the military beat, and he reported the story.
Veterans groups say there was little chance for public comment when the bill first passed in the spring, says Kayla Owens, the spouse of a disabled vet.
So how is it in a year when we have a $5 billion surplus that no one can find money for a program that's been promised to veterans?
Among the changes is no longer paying for graduate degrees and cutting out non-combat related injuries. Veterans groups favor a full repeal. Lawmakers worry the program's price tag rose from $12 million in 2019 to $65 million in 2023, says Virginia Senator Mamie Locke.
Unfortunately, some of those recommendations had some unintended consequences. So it's the unintended consequences that we're trying to deal with. Some of them being that it had some negative impacts on Gold Star families.
The Virginia Military Survivors and Dependents Education Program covers survivors of troops and first responders killed in the line of duty, along with the families of troops who are at least 90% disabled. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
New federal funding will help Hampton and Newport News support survivors of traumatic events. WHRO's Nick McNamara has that story.
Congressman Bobby Scott presented the check to the Hampton Newport News Community Services Board. The $400,000 will go toward hiring new crisis therapists and trauma support training for existing staff.
Now, this funding will allow them to set up an emergency group. So when there's an event, that group can be dispatched immediately without diverting attention from ongoing services.
The funding request stems from the shooting at Rich Neck Elementary in 2023. CSB staff provided mental health services to people directly and indirectly affected afterward. The new CSB staff will work as liaisons to the community, helping raise awareness of and connecting people to its available services. Nick McNamara, WHRO News.
Local housing studies have pointed to residents who oppose development in their neighborhoods, known as NIMBYs, that stands for Not in My Backyard. They're a significant barrier to building affordable housing. Gillian Pressman is an organizer with a new group fighting for more housing. WHRO's Ryan Murphy sat down with Pressman to talk about YIMBY Hampton Roads, Yes in My Backyard, and how it's pushing cities to do more.
Let's start with a question I'm sure you get a lot. What the heck is a YIMBY?
YIMBY is in contrast to NIMBY, so not in my backyard. So oftentimes when we talk about housing, nobody wants people to be homeless, for example. They think that we should have enough housing for everyone who needs it. I think people like, in theory, we should be building abundant housing so that, every person looking to buy a home, every person looking to rent has ample choices, and those choices are affordable, and those choices are near their job, and they're near opportunities, and they're near fun stuff to do. And, people like all of those things. In theory, people are like, yes, that sounds like a great idea. Where the rubber meets the road is when somebody says, okay, I got a permit to build housing, and I'm showing up next door to you in your backyard, and I'm building this housing, and there's going to be construction, and that's noisy. And then there's also going to be change. There's also going to be new people moving into your neighborhood. And I think a lot of people feel scared of that or threatened by that. That's where Not My Backyard comes from, where people are like, we love housing, just not here. And so we need to actively counter that. So we're YIMBY, which stands for Yes in My Backyard. And we're people who are so enchanted by all the tremendous benefits of building new housing. We're like, yes, we do want housing everywhere, including in our own backyards.
So you've just rolled out this new campaign, the Fight for 50,000. What's that about?
So 50,000 refers to the housing shortage that's estimated in Hampton roads. So we need to build 50,000 more homes. And how is it going to happen? It's actually not that complicated, because when we actually look at the policies, there's so many policies in place that make it extremely difficult to build housing and almost impossible to build multifamily housing, which is the type of housing where in the same amount of space you could house one family, you're housing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 families. We have made it really difficult or impossible to build that kind of housing in so much of our land. And there's some really easy fixes.
Your group is recommending cities revise their rules to make it easier and more economical to build residential. Things like reducing parking minimums for apartments or loosening lot size requirements to make it easier to build smaller homes, among other proposals. What kind of response are you getting from city or elected officials? Are they on board with these ideas?
People, I think, like these ideas in theory, and they're excited about them, and they certainly want the benefits of abundant housing. They certainly want more affordability and more vibrancy and all the great things that happen. They also don't want to feel like everyone in the community hates them and they're going to lose their seat. They also don't want the political pushback. So that's why this is not just an issue of policy. This is an issue of politics. And our job as a YIMBY movement is to make it clear to those policymakers that not only is this a good idea and this is good for our community, but we also need to make it clear that this is popular, that there are going to be people who resist, but those people are the minority, and the vast majority of people are excited about this. We'll show up to those hearings, we'll vote, we'll put in the legwork to support the politics of YIMBYs, and people who want to stick their neck out for housing.
What sort of impacts are you seeing on the ground from this shortage of 50,000 housing units?
We did tabling at an event, and people just kept coming up to us and saying like, oh my gosh, it's taken so long for me to find a place to live. I have to live with roommates that I don't want to live with. My rent is outrageous. I wish I could buy a home, but I really can't buy a home. We're just hearing like a real affordability crunch. And that's a big shame, especially in this region, because, we do have jobs and we do have opportunity here, but, there's jobs and opportunity in other places too. And so if we're not making it affordable for people to access the opportunities here, they're going to move. Young workers, young families, it's not going to be helpful for their economy.
This is WHRO's Weekly Edition. Remember, for any stories you've missed, you can visit us on the WHRO smartphone app or all social media platforms.
The USS Eisenhower is returning to Norfolk after one of the Navy's busiest deployments in decades. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh is back with that story.
The Pentagon announced over the weekend that the Ike and its strike group left the Red Sea. The carrier is in the Mediterranean and is making its way back home after 8 months at sea. The carrier left Norfolk in October after war broke out in Gaza. It spent much of its time in the Red Sea protecting international shipping. Its planes bombed sites in Yemen controlled by Houthi rebels. The ship's aircraft downed drones and missiles at times on a daily basis, making it one of the busiest deployments of the post-World War II era. The Ike is being replaced in the Red Sea by the San Diego-based USS Roosevelt, at least until the Norfolk-based USS Truman is ready to deploy later this summer. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
Newport News Mayor Phil Jones says a local commission he created to study how Christopher Newport University displaced a black neighborhood has started its work. WHRO's Michelle Hankerson reports.
Jones spoke on the group's progress on WHRO's Another View with Barbara Ham-Lee last week.
I am confident that we were able to have some course of actions that are going to take a look at what was done and some ways we can prevent that, but also rectify the situation. Because things have to be fair.
Jones and CNU President William Kelly announced the commission following an investigative series published by the Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism at WHRO. It found colleges across the state pushed Black residents out of their homes to make way for campus expansions. The stories also led to lawmakers creating a statewide commission to look at the issue at other colleges, including the University of Virginia. Michelle Hankerson, WHRO News.
The town of Tangier is on one of the last inhabited islands in the Chesapeake Bay. It has a unique culture and centuries-old crabbing industry. But that way of life is facing an existential threat from erosion and rising sea levels. WHRO's Katherine Hafner reports on the race to save Tangier.
Mayor James Eskridge is standing on a boat just off the island of Tangier. He points to the town's water tower, which features a pair of images.
There's a crab on one side and a cross on the other. So that's what we're about.
A crab and a cross, seafood and church. That sums up the heart of this island community, Eskridge says. He goes by the nickname Ooker and calls himself a crabber first, mayor second. He has plenty of memories from his 65 years living on the island, but some are literally washing away. Like in this stretch of water, which he says used to be land, covered in blackberry bushes.
It's hard to imagine that you can pick blackberries down here. It's all underwater now.
Tangier has lost over 2/3 of its landmass since 1850. Erosion from winds and waves has eaten away at the island. And now climate change is making the problem worse by driving sea levels higher. Scientists predict Tangier could pretty much disappear within just a few decades. Hillary Falk is president and CEO of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation.
We are seeing a rate of change right now that requires urgency, and we are going to lose places and stories and histories.
Tangier Island is small, but every inch is steeped in history. From its first Native American residents to its discovery by the early colonist Captain John Smith, and later role as a British fort. The island's isolation from the mainland has fostered a tight-knit community where neighbors rely on the water and each other. Only around 400 people live here, and they don't want to leave. Eskridge says Tangier moved anywhere else simply wouldn't be Tangier.
We're not just talking about a small piece of land. I'm talking about a community, a way of life, a culture.
But saving Tangier will take a lot of money, something like $300 million to fully protect the island. Researchers say relocating the town would also be hugely expensive, estimated around $200 million. Senator Tim Kaine argues it's worth making an effort to save Tangier. It could create a model for other vulnerable communities.
If we make this investment in Tangier, we'll learn what works and what doesn't, and that may make it easier to make our dollars go farther as we're making investments in other communities, because sea level rise is going to affect an awful lot of this country.
Kaine recently pushed President Biden to include $10 million for Tangier in his proposed budget. That will have to survive Congress. Kaine says the island's too important to the history and fabric of Virginia to lose.
I think giving up on Tangier as a place for humans would be a big mistake.
The Bay Foundation agrees. The group recently led a trip to the island to talk about the best next steps to protect Tangier.
But I do thank everybody for coming. And
over local crab cakes and flounder, they met with 24 leaders across academia, nonprofits, federal agencies, and the state. Local leaders say the most urgent need is bolstering the shoreline against erosion. They want the Army Corps of Engineers to ramp up existing work where they reuse dredged material to stabilize beaches. Joe McMahon is a civil engineer with the Corps. He says the agency is working towards that, but needs the okay from lawmakers and money.
In order for us to actually perform work under those authorities, we have to receive authorization and funding from Congress.
That's what the broad ambition to save Tangier really comes down to: funding. In the meantime, Tangier is losing not only land but also population. More and more young residents are leaving. But 23-year-old Cameron Evans is staying. He moved away for college but recently returned.
It's a hard place to leave. I'm intertwined with the land. I crab, I fish. I'm very fortunate to live in such a place. I'd like to continue to stay here. I'd like to at least have that option.
Evans is now the town's vice mayor. He says his goal is to keep the island alive for future families and tourists to enjoy just as much as he has. Katherine Hafner, WHRO News.
Norfolk's Housing Authority is getting closer to replacing 2 more public housing neighborhoods near downtown. WHRO's Ryan Murphy has that story, too.
The redevelopment of the Calvert Square and Young Terrace public housing would require the relocation of more than 1,000 families. Steve Morales with the Norfolk Redevelopment and Housing Authority says they're in the earliest phases of the effort.
We are planning to plan.
Morales says the authority will take the next 6 months or so to figure out how it wants to approach the redevelopment for Calvert and Young. From there, it'll take a year or two to develop the actual plans for the new neighborhood. The authority's in the midst of a years-long redevelopment of what was Tidewater Gardens, where hundreds of public housing units were raised and new apartments are currently going up. The goal was always to redevelop all 3, but the focus since 2018 has been on the federally backed Tidewater project. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
Primary voting results for the 2nd Congressional District are in. Missy Cotter Smalsel won the Democratic primary. WHRO's Sienna Morales has more.
Missy Cotter Smalsel faced off against Jake Denton and won the nomination. Cotter Smalsel will go on to challenge U.S. Representative Jen Kiggins in November. November's race will be closely watched. It's in a notorious swing district, and the results could determine which party has a majority in the U.S. House come November. Early voting begins September 21st. Sienna Morales, WHRO News.
Former President Donald Trump is set to hold a campaign rally in Chesapeake today, Friday. The event will be at 3 p.m. at the historic Greenbrier Farms. Lydia Winstead reports for WHRO News.
The rally will be Trump's first appearance following his CNN debate with President Joe Biden on Thursday night. Governor Glenn Youngkin will also attend the rally. Trump will discuss economics under Biden's presidency, according to his campaign, along with border policy. Biden won in 2020 in Chesapeake by about 7 percentage points, but current polls had the 2024 matchup a close race. Lydia Winstead, WHRO News.
Lou Hansen is the editor for the Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism at WHRO. He recently sat down with reporter Carolyn Shapiro to discuss their latest story on Dollar Tree. The Chesapeake-based national chain has struggled with safety management, low wages, and poor working conditions.
Hi, this is Lou Hansen from the Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism at WHRO. I'm talking with Carolyn Shapiro, an investigative reporter who has covered business for several years. Carolyn has dived into the history of Dollar Tree, and it's a company that she knows quite well. Carolyn, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Lou. Thanks for having me.
Tell us about Dollar Tree's roots in Virginia.
It's a fully Virginia-grown company. It started as a family-owned business, just a handful of stores at its start, to a company with more than 16,000 stores today.
Who does Dollar Tree appeal to?
Dollar Tree and Dollar Tree's roots have always been, Dollar Tree's been sort of heavily in its locations in what you might deem suburban areas. The company really built itself on, you might say, suburban strip malls.
This has become an enormous chain, 200,000 workers in the Dollar Tree world. Who regulates those stores for health and safety?
With most retailers in the country, Dollar Tree being no exception, workplace safety and health is overseen by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration federally. And the way OSHA works, there are 21 states that regulate and oversee health and safety for private employers with their own, what they call state plans. And Virginia is one of those state plan states.
What records did you look at?
The Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration, they collect data from all the states, but I looked at records both within the state of Virginia, the State Plan Office, as well as federal OSHA documents. There's been several actions, violations that federal OSHA has identified across the country in Dollar Tree and Family Dollar stores.
Yeah. Tell us what you found over the past 10 years in Virginia.
As of 2019, there were 428 Dollar Trees in Virginia, Dollar Tree and Family Dollars. For a company of that size, VOSH, as they call it, the Virginia Occupational Safety and Health Program, has only inspected 42 locations in the last 10 years, according to the analysis of the data that we did. Of those, 31 of those inspections resulted in identified violations.
And how much in fines were they assessed over these 10 years?
In that time period, $1.9 million in penalties were initially issued against the company.
What types of violations did you find in these Virginia records?
You can sort of see recurrence of types of problems in these stores. You see the word haphazardly stacked in a lot of these inspection documents. Blocking means of egress, blocking exit routes, blocking access to fire extinguishers in case of fire. There were identifications of pests. Roaches and mice we're mostly talking about being harbored by the number of boxes and being able to evade, pest programs in some of these stores, if even the stores had an active pest program.
You interviewed several Dollar Tree employees and also advocates for those workers. What do they tell you about conditions?
Workers at Dollar Tree, certainly they have expressed that they'd like better pay. At least 2/3 of the workers for the company are part-time workers.
And you found the median employee pay is $15,600 annually.
Yep.
And that's just above the federal poverty level for a single-person household. And even for full-time employees, you found that the median pay is about $36,700 a year.
Dollar Tree has talked about making investments in salaries. Many of those workers would like to see better pay. We used to call it low-skilled labor. Now we call it low-wage labor.
And the current CEO has acknowledged that the stores and warehouses aren't up to speed. And you made several efforts to get interviews with top Dollar Tree officials. What were their response?
We requested 3 times, in addition to some other correspondence related to specific questions, to speak with Dollar Tree officials, and that request was declined by Dollar Tree spokesperson. That Dollar Tree spokesperson gave us the following response. Quote, "From the health and safety of our teams to the compensation and career growth of all of our associates, we are making significant investments to continually improve our associate experience."
And labor groups have tried to improve this. What have the advocates said, and what kind of efforts did you find out?
There are some activist groups that are working very specifically with dollar store workers, but actually organizing, unionizing, finding a way to give those workers representation to fight for their own rights is a huge challenge.
Carolyn Shapiro, thanks very much for all your insights and all your hard reporting. We'll talk to you again, and I'm sure we'll follow up soon.
Thank you so much, Lou.
You can read the entire story at vcij.org. You've been listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. We had help today from Steve Walsh, Nick McNamara, Ryan Murphy, Katherine Hafner, Michelle Hankerson, Sienna Morales, and Lydia Winstead. Also, VCIJ's Lou Hansen and Carolyn Shapiro. And a tip of the hat to Connor Worley, who produced today's broadcast. A reminder, you can always catch full episodes on the Weekly Edition podcast feed, and you can get your news updates at WHRO.org, the WHRO smartphone app, and the WHRO Reports podcast feed. For all of us at WHRO and WHRV, I'm Doug Boynton. Stay safe. Be well.